and give the 3 points that you bring pastors together, and you're seeing miracles begin. When they get on their knees, God's putting them on their feet. They don't just live on their knees, they come from their knees to really become a light that pierces the darkness. What are those points?
Well, James, I have seen in my experience of being inside government, being on the streets as a police officer, and now being an advocate for the family in Washington, that America is not suffering from a crisis of politics. We're suffering from a spiritual and a moral crisis and an absence of a recognition that there is a God who created us. And as the creator, he set the rules. And I believe, in fact, I think this is why I'm in Washington. I would rather be full-time in my home in Louisiana, where the food is much better. I believe that it is a call to the pastors of America. Within the spiritual crisis that we face, we must have the spiritual leaders leading the church first. Each of us as Christians, to live out what we want to uphold in society, we first have to live it out. And that means that we've got to be pure and holy in our conduct, and that we've got to love our wives and our husbands and our children and raise them in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. And so the pastor needs to challenge people to do that. But first, the pastor has to get the heart of God. And I believe God's heart is broken for America. I believe he's broken for those children. 17% of the children in the African-American community will grow up in an intact family. I mean, can you imagine the hurt and the loneliness and the rejection?
I see it, and I love these precious people. I love anybody that's struggling.
God's heart is broken for them, and I believe until the church begins to get God's heart, and our heart is broken, that we cannot mend the brokenhearted. And so we're challenging pastors to pray, asking pastors to make a 6-month commitment to begin to pray for our nation and their community, and begin to get God's heart for their community. Then secondly, we ask them to, it's our 3 Ps. The second P is to preach the Word of God. Pastors have been made to feel like they're not relevant to today's issues, you know, because you got CNN. People 100 years ago wanted to know what the pastor had to say. Now they just turn on to see what Wolf Blitzer has to say. And that all has its place. But nobody can help us understand better than someone who's going to take the Word of God and compare it to what's happening in our day. And that must come from the pastor. How do we deal with the issue of embryonic stem cell research? What does the Word of God have to say about it? You know, it does have something to say about it. What does it say about our lifestyles? It has something to say. And if the pastors aren't bold enough to proclaim that truth, why do we think the politicians will? And there's an absence of that moral clarity coming from the pulpit. So we're challenging pastors to preach. And the third thing we're challenging them to do, and this is actually the hardest, is to partner with other pastors in their community, is to go across denominational lines, go across ethnic lines, and stand arm in arm with other Bible-believing pastors and encourage one another, pray together, and allow God to use them to impact their community.